Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance and watched the alien world grow larger on the main screen. The planet looked like a giant blue crystal floating in space, with white clouds wrapped around it like soft ribbons. He had never seen anything so beautiful and terrifying at the same time. This was Zephy's Prime, home to the most powerful alien race humans had ever encountered. "Sir, we're getting their landing coordinates now," said Lisa Grant from her communication station. Her voice was steady, but Jake could hear the nervousness underneath. They all felt it. This mission could change everything for humanity, or it could be their last. Dr. Katie Blake looked up from her science console with wide eyes. "The energy readings from that planet are off the charts. Jake, whatever these Zephyrians are using for power, it's nothing like our technology." Ryan Cooper, their tactical officer, frowned at his displays. "I don't like going down there without backup. Our weapons won't mean much against beings who can move objects with their minds." Jake nodded, but kept his expression calm. "As mission commander," he couldn't show doubt even though his stomach was full of butterflies. Earth needed this alliance. The Zephyrian Empire controlled 12 star systems and had technology that could help humanity reach the stars safely. But they were also dangerous. Reports from other alien races spoke of the Zephyrians' ability to control minds and bend others to their will. The shuttle ride down to the planet's surface was quiet. Jake watched the crystal cities pass beneath him, each one glowing with its own inner light. The buildings looked grown rather than built, like massive gems that had sprouted from the ground. Everything was smooth curves and flowing lines that hurt to look at for too long. They landed in a clearing surrounded by towers that reached up into the clouds. The air tasted sweet and made Jake's skin tingle. Waiting for them were 6 Zephyrian guards, tall and thin with skin that seemed to be made of living crystal. Their faces were beautiful but cold, like perfect statues that had never learned to smile. "Follow," one of them said without moving its mouth. The voice appeared directly in Jake's head, making him stumble slightly. The others looked equally shaken by the telepathic communication. The Crystal Palace was even more impressive up close. The walls pulsed with soft blue light that seemed to match Jake's heartbeat. Corridors stretched in impossible directions, and stairs spiraled upward into darkness. Jake tried to memorize the path, but gave up after the 5th turn. This place wasn't built for human minds to understand. They were led into a vast throne room, with walls that rose so high the ceiling disappeared into shadows. At the center sat Queen Velara on a throne made from a single massive crystal. She was the most alien thing Jake had ever seen, and somehow the most beautiful. Her skin was pale silver, her hair flowed like liquid light, and her eyes were deep pools of starlight. She was tall even sitting down, probably 8 feet if she stood, and wore robes that seemed to be made from woven moonbeams. "Humans," she said, and her voice filled the room without her lips moving. "You come seeking alliance with the Zephyrian Empire, yet you bring weapons and shields around your minds. Is this how you show respect?" Jake stepped forward, fighting the urge to kneel. Something about her presence made him want to bow down and never look up again. "Your Majesty, we come in peace. These are standard diplomatic protocols. We mean no disrespect." The Queen's eyes focused on him, and Jake felt pressure building in his head. It was like someone was pushing against the inside of his skull with gentle but insistent fingers. He gritted his teeth and pushed back, refusing to let her into his thoughts. Her eyes widened slightly. "Interesting. You resist where others cannot. Tell me, human, what makes you think your small empire deserves partnership with beings who have ruled the stars for 1,000 years?" Jake took a deep breath. "Because we offer something you've never had before. We offer choice. Every world in our alliance joins freely. No one is forced. No minds are controlled. The queen stood slowly, her height making Jake feel like a child. The air in the room grew thick and heavy. Choice? Her laugh was like crystal bells breaking. Choice is chaos. Choice is weakness. We bring order to the galaxy. We end wars by ending the foolish notion that lesser beings should rule themselves. But that's exactly the problem, Jake said, his voice growing stronger despite the pressure in his head. You're creating peace through fear. That's not real peace. That's just a bigger prison. The queen's expression changed from amusement to anger faster than lightning. The crystal walls began to glow brighter, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with her rage. Jake's companions fell to their knees, crying out as invisible force pressed down on them. But Jake remained standing, his jaw set in stubborn determination. How dare you? The queen's voice thundered through their minds. You insects come to my world and lecture me about peace? You who fight wars over scraps of land and drops of oil. Jake felt blood trickle from his nose, but kept his eyes locked on hers. We fight because we choose to fight, and we also choose to make peace. Your subjects don't get to choose anything. The queen raised her hand, and Jake felt the USS Defiance die. Even from the planet's surface, he could sense the ship's destruction, could feel the lives of the crew members they'd left behind, snuffed out like candles in a hurricane. His heart broke, but he didn't look away from her terrible, beautiful face. Now, you have no choice either, she said softly. Your ship is gone. Your crew is dead. You are prisoners of the Zephyrian Empire. Jake's companions were dragged away by crystal guards, their minds too shattered by the queen's assault to resist. But Jake walked on his own feet, his head held high, even as tears ran down his cheeks for his lost crew. The queen watched him go with something like curiosity in her ancient eyes. Put the others in the standard cells, she commanded her guards. But bring this one to the tower chambers. I want to study him more closely. As Jake was escorted through the crystal corridors, he wondered if his defiance had doomed them all, or if it might somehow be their salvation. The queen's power was terrifying, but there had been something else in her eyes when she looked at him. Something that might have been surprise or even respect. He was about to find out just how dangerous it could be to surprise a being who had ruled the galaxy for centuries. Jake woke up in a room that seemed to be carved from the inside of a massive crystal. Light flowed through the walls like slow water, casting rainbow patterns on the floor. There were no windows, but somehow he could see the alien city spreading out below. The room held a bed that looked grown rather than made, a table of smooth stone, and a chair that adjusted itself to his body when he sat down. He had been here for 3 days. Now and each morning brought the same routine. Queen Velara would arrive as the dual suns rose over her crystal city. She would sit across from him and try to break into his mind. And each time, Jake would resist. Today was no different. The queen appeared in the doorway, her silver skin glowing softly in the morning light. She wore different robes today. These ones seemed to be made from captured starlight itself. Her hair flowed around her shoulders like liquid mercury, and her eyes held that same mixture of frustration and fascination they had shown yesterday. "Good morning, Jake Morrison," she said, settling into the chair that grew from the floor to meet her. "Are you ready to lower your defenses today?" Jake met her gaze steadily. "Are you ready to free my friends?" She smiled, an expression that was both beautiful and terrifying. Still so stubborn. "Do you not understand what I could do to you? I could tear your mind apart like paper. I could make you forget your own name. I could fill your thoughts with such pain that you would beg for death. But you haven't," Jake said quietly. "Why is that?" The queen was silent for a moment, her fingers drumming against the arm of her chair. When she spoke, there was something almost like uncertainty in her voice. "In 1,000 years of rule, I have never encountered a mind like yours. Every being in the galaxy bows before Zephyrian mental power. We conquered 12 star systems without firing a single weapon, because no one could resist our telepathic abilities. Yet you sit there, as if my thoughts are nothing more than a gentle breeze. Jake leaned forward slightly. Maybe that should tell you something about the way you've been doing things. What do you mean? Every other race you've encountered, they were afraid. Fear makes minds weak, makes them easier to control, but I'm not afraid of you anymore. The Queen's eyes narrowed. You should be afraid. I destroyed your ship with a thought. I could kill you the same way. You could, Jake agreed, but you won't, because I'm the first person in centuries who can actually talk to you instead of just agreeing with everything you say. When was the last time someone told you that you were wrong about something? The Queen stood abruptly and began pacing the room. Her movement was like watching liquid grace given form. I am not wrong. Order is better than chaos. Unity is better than division. The Zephyrian way brings peace to the galaxy. Does it, though? Jake asked. Or does it just hide the problems? What happens when you're gone? What happens if something happens to your people? All these worlds you control, they don't know how to govern themselves anymore. They've forgotten how to make choices. Choice leads to conflict, the Queen said firmly. I have seen it countless times. Give beings freedom, and they use it to hurt each other. Jake thought about his friends locked away somewhere in this crystal palace. He thought about Dr. Blake and her gentle curiosity about the universe. He thought about Ryan's fierce loyalty and Lisa's quick wit. My people fight sometimes, that's true. But we also help each other. We sacrifice for strangers. We create art and music and stories. We explore the unknown, not for conquest, but for wonder. Can your people say the same? The Queen stopped pacing and looked at him with those ancient, star-filled eyes. We have no need for such things. We share thoughts directly. We have no use for primitive communication methods like art or music. But that's exactly what you're missing, Jake said, standing up to face her. Art isn't just communication. It's expression. It's the way we show what makes us unique. When you share thoughts directly, where's the mystery? Where's the surprise? Where's the joy of discovering something new about someone you thought you knew? For a moment, something flickered across the Queen's face. It was gone so quickly, Jake almost missed it, but it looked like loneliness. I do not understand these concepts you speak of. Mystery and surprise are inefficient. Joy is ... What is joy? Jake stared at her in amazement. You don't know what joy is? I know satisfaction when order is maintained. I know pleasure when my enemies are defeated. But this joy you speak of, it is unknown to me. Jake sat back down heavily. For the first time since meeting her, he felt sorry for Queen Villara. Joy it's what you feel when something wonderful happens that you didn't expect. It's the warmth in your chest when you see friends after a long time apart. It's the way your heart jumps when you discover something beautiful. It's what makes life worth living. The Queen resumed her seat, her expression thoughtful. Show me, she said softly. What? Show me this joy. Use your thoughts to make me understand. Jake hesitated. I can't do that the way your people can. Humans aren't telepathic. I'd have to tell you a story. Then tell me a story. Jake thought for a moment, then began to speak. He told her about Earth, about blue skies and green forests. He described the sound of rain on leaves and the smell of flowers in spring. He talked about children laughing and playing, about lovers holding hands, about friends gathering around tables to share meals and stories. As he spoke, he watched the Queen's face. Her expression grew softer, more wondering. Her eyes seemed to lose some of their cold distance. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Your world sounds very different from mine, she said finally. How so? Here, everything is ordered. Beautiful, yes, but predictable. The crystals grow in perfect patterns. The cities are arranged for maximum efficiency. My people move through their lives like dancers performing the same dance they have performed for centuries. She paused. There is no surprise. There is no what did you call it? Wonder? Jake nodded. That's what freedom gives you. A chance to be surprised. The opportunity to choose something different. The queen was silent again, her gaze distant. When she looked back at him, there was something new in her eyes. Not the cold calculation he had seen before, but something warmer, something almost human. Tomorrow I will show you my world, she said, standing to leave. Perhaps you can help me understand what I have been missing. After she left, Jake sat, alone in his crystal chamber, and wondered what he had started. He had come here as a diplomat trying to save humanity. Now he found himself trying to save the soul of a being who had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years. The strangest part was that he was beginning to think it might actually be possible. Queen Valara kept her promise. The next morning she led Jake through parts of her palace he had never seen before. They walked through galleries filled with crystal sculptures that sang when touched by light. They visited chambers where Zephyrian architects grew new sections of the city using nothing but focused thought. They stood on balconies that overlooked gardens where plants from a dozen worlds grew in perfect geometric patterns. Everything was beautiful. But Jake began to understand what the queen had meant about predictability. Every crystal grew in exact proportions. Every garden followed precise mathematical designs. Every corridor curved at angles that had been calculated for optimal efficiency. It was perfect and lifeless at the same time. Do you see? The queen asked as they paused beside a fountain that played the same melody over and over again. Order, harmony, each element in its proper place. Jake watched the water dance in its endless loop. It's beautiful, he said carefully. But don't. You ever want to see what would happen if you changed the pattern? Just once? The queen looked puzzled. Why would I change something that works perfectly? Because you might discover something even better. Or just different. Different can be good too. They continued their tour in silence until they reached a section of the palace Jake had not expected to see. Here, behind walls of darker crystal, were the holding cells. Jake's heart raced as he saw his friends for the first time since their capture. Dr. Katie Blake sat in a corner of her cell, her normally bright eyes dull and unfocused. Ryan Cooper paced like a caged animal, his hands clenched into fists. Lisa Grant lay on a crystal bench, staring at nothing. They all looked broken in a way that had nothing to do with physical injury. What did you do to them? Jake demanded, spinning to face the queen. Nothing permanent, she replied calmly. Their minds were simply dusted. They no longer feel the need to resist or plan escape. They are at peace. Jake pressed his hands against the crystal wall, separating him from his friends. Katie, he called out. Katie, can you hear me? Dr. Blake looked up at the sound of his voice, but her expression remained blank. She smiled a small, empty smile and nodded before returning her gaze to the floor. You broke them, Jake whispered, his voice thick with rage and sorrow. I freed them from the burden of hopeless struggle, the queen corrected. They suffer no more. They want for nothing. Is this not kinder than leaving them to despair? Jake turned to face her, his eyes blazing with fury. Kinder? You took away everything that made them who they are. Katie used to stay up all night, studying star charts because she loved learning new things. Ryan told jokes to keep everyone's spirits up even in the worst situations. Lisa could make friends with anyone in 5 minutes because she genuinely cared about people. Where are those people now? The queen stepped back slightly at the intensity of his anger. They are safe. They are content. They're not alive, Jake said flatly. You've turned them into empty shells. This isn't peace, it's death. For the first time since he had met her, Queen Velara looked uncertain. She gazed at the prisoners, her expression troubled. I do not understand. They show no signs of distress. Their vital signs are stable. How is this death? Jake took a shaking breath and tried to control his anger. Rage wouldn't help his friends now. Let me ask you something. When you were young, before you became queen, what did you dream about? What did you want to do with your life? The queen was quiet for a long moment. I dreamed of seeing distant stars. I wanted to explore worlds that no Zephyrian had ever visited. I imagined discovering new forms of life, new kinds of beauty. Her voice grew softer. I dreamed of meeting someone who could show me wonders I had never imagined. And if someone had taken those dreams away from you, made you content to sit in a cell and think of nothing, would you still have been you? The queen stared at him, and at the prisoners, then back at him. Something shifted in her expression. I begin to understand your meaning. Dreams are what make us alive, Jake continued. Hope, curiosity, even fear and anger, they're all part of what makes someone real. When you take those away, you're not helping people. You're destroying them. The queen moved closer to the cells, studying Jake's friends with new eyes. But they were suffering. They were afraid and desperate. Surely it is better to end such pain. Sometimes pain serves a purpose, Jake said gently. Katie's frustration with not understanding something drove her to keep learning. Ryan's fear for his friends made him brave enough to protect them. Lisa's sadness when she saw injustice motivated her to help others. Take away the bad feelings, and you take away the good ones too. The queen pressed her hand against the crystal. Wall, in all my centuries of rule, no one has ever explained this to me. My advisors tell me that order is good and chaos is bad. That control brings peace and freedom brings war. But you speak of things I have never considered. Jake moved to stand beside her. Maybe that's because your advisors are afraid to disagree with you. How can they give you honest advice when they know you can read their thoughts and punish them? For thinking the wrong thing? The queen turned to look at him sharply. Are you saying I rule through fear? Don't you? The queen was silent for several minutes, her ancient eyes distant with thought. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I have been alone for so long, surrounded by thousands of subjects, but alone. Everyone agrees with me because they must. Everyone serves me because they have no choice. I thought this was strength, but perhaps it is the greatest weakness of all. Jake felt something shift between them. The terrible mental pressure that always surrounded the queen seemed to ease slightly. It doesn't have to be that way. How could it be different? She asked. This is the only way I have ever known to rule. You could try asking instead of commanding. You could listen to disagreement without punishing it. You could give people the choice to follow you because they believe in you, not because they fear you. The queen looked back at the prisoners. These humans of yours, they followed you by choice? Yes, we all volunteered for this mission knowing it was dangerous. We came here together because we trusted each other. And this trust, how is it earned? Jake thought about his crew, about the years they had served together, the dangers they had faced side by side. Trust is earned by keeping your word, by protecting those weaker than yourself, by admitting when you're wrong and trying to do better, by caring more about others than about your own power. The queen was quiet again, processing these concepts that were completely foreign to her experience. Finally, she spoke. If I were to restore your friends' minds, if I were to return their dreams and fears and hopes, what would they do? I don't know, Jake admitted. They might try to escape. They might hate you for what you did to them. They might never forgive you. And yet you asked me to take this risk. Jake met her star-filled eyes steadily. Because without that risk, they're already dead. And because taking that risk might be the first step toward becoming the kind of ruler who deserves to be followed, instead of feared. The Queen stood silently for a long time, her gaze moving between Jake and his broken friends. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of decision that hadn't been there before. Very well, Jake Morrison. You have given me much to think about. Tomorrow, I will consider what you have said. But first, I must understand something more. She turned to face him fully. Why do you care so much about changing me? Why not simply focus on saving yourself and your friends? Jake considered the question seriously. Because I've seen what you could be. Under all that power and fear, there's someone who once dreamed of exploring the stars and meeting new friends. That person is still in there somewhere. And because if you change, really change, you could free billions of beings across the galaxy who are living the same empty existence as my friends. The Queen nodded slowly. You would risk everything for people you have never met, wouldn't you? Jake asked quietly. For the first time since he had known her, Queen Valara smiled. It was a real smile, warm and wondering and completely human. Despite her alien features. Perhaps, she said softly, perhaps I would. Jake woke to the sound of chaos. Crystal walls were cracking throughout the palace, sending rainbow fragments cascading to the floor. Emergency lights pulsed in patterns he didn't recognize, and somewhere in the distance he could hear the sound of running feet and shouted orders. Queen Valara appeared in his doorway, but she looked different than he had ever seen her. Her perfect composure was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. Her silver skin was pale, and her star-filled eyes were wide with uncertainty. What's happening? Jake asked, rising from his bed. Revolution, she said simply. The other worlds in my empire have begun to resist our control. It started 3 days ago on the mining world of Ketra. The workers there somehow broke free from our mental influence and convinced others to join them. Now the rebellion is spreading to 6 different systems. Jake felt his heart leap with hope and dread at the same time. How is that possible? I thought no one could resist Zephyrian telepathy. The Queen moved into the room, her usual graceful movements now sharp with agitation. We believe they learned techniques from studying your friends before I adjusted their minds. They observed how humans resist telepathic intrusion and develop their own methods. My friends taught them how to be free, Jake said, with pride and sorrow mixed together. Yes, and now my entire empire is falling apart, the Queen snapped. Then she stopped, her expression growing thoughtful. Though perhaps that is not the correct word. Perhaps it is finally coming alive. Jake studied her face carefully. You don't sound as angry about this as I would have expected. The Queen sat down heavily in the chair that grew from the floor to meet her. I have spent the last 3 days thinking about everything you told me, about dreams and choices, and what it means to be truly alive. When the reports of rebellion first reached me, my instinct was to crush it immediately with overwhelming force. But then I remembered your words about trust and earning the right to lead. So what did you do? Nothing, she admitted. For the first time in my 1,000-year reign, I did nothing. My advisors are furious. My military commanders demand permission to use our full psychic powers to restore order. But I find myself wondering, what will happen if I let this rebellion continue? Jake moved to sit across from her. Are you afraid? The Queen considered the question seriously. Yes, I am terrified. All my life I have known exactly how to respond to any situation. Use my power to control minds, impose order, eliminate resistance. But you have shown me that there might be another way, and I do not know how to follow that path." Before Jake could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. 3 Zephyrian officials entered the room, their crystal features set in expressions of cold fury. Jake recognized them as the Queen's senior advisors, beings who had served the Empire for centuries. "Your Majesty," the lead advisor said, his telepathic voice sharp with disapproval, "we have waited long enough for you to act. The rebellion grows stronger with each hour of delay. We must crush it now before it spreads further." Queen Velara stood slowly, her height giving her a commanding presence even in her uncertainty. "And what would you have me do, Counselor Zark?" "Use the full power of the Zephyrian Mind Network," Zark replied immediately. "Link with every telepath in the Empire simultaneously. Project our combined will across all rebel worlds at once. Show them that resistance is not only futile, but unthinkable." Jake felt sick at the casual way they discussed destroying the minds of billions of beings. But he forced himself to remain silent, sensing that this was a crucial moment for the Queen. "And after we break their spirits completely, what then?" the Queen asked quietly. "Then there will be peace," said another advisor. "Order will be restored. The Empire will function as it always has." "But will it be real peace?" the Queen pressed. "Or will it simply be the absence of visible conflict?" The 3 advisors exchanged glances, clearly disturbed by their Queen's questions. "Your Majesty," Zark said carefully, "these philosophical concerns are irrelevant. What matters is maintaining control." "Is it?" the Queen asked. She looked at Jake, then back at her advisors. "Counselor Zark, in all your centuries of service, have you ever disagreed with one of my decisions?" "Of course not, Your Majesty." "Your wisdom is absolute. Have you ever had a thought that you believed I would not approve of?" Zark hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. That is, Your Majesty, I do not understand the purpose of these questions." "Answer me," the Queen commanded, and for a moment her old authority blazed forth. "Yes," Zark admitted reluctantly. "Sometimes I have wondered if there might be more efficient ways to govern certain worlds. But I would never presume to question your methods." The Queen nodded sadly. "Because you know, I could read your thoughts and punish you for them. So instead you tell me what you think I want to hear, and I make decisions based on incomplete information." She turned to the other advisors. "Is this true for all of you?" The 3 Zephyrians looked increasingly uncomfortable. Their perfect composure was cracking, revealing emotions Jake hadn't known they were capable of feeling. "Your Majesty," one of them said desperately, "you are speaking like the human prisoner. Has he somehow infected your mind with his primitive ideas?" The Queen's eyes flashed dangerously, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Counselor Vex, you will not speak of Jake Morrison as if he were a disease. He has shown me possibilities I never knew existed." "But Your Majesty," Zark protested, "if we do not act soon, the rebellion will succeed. Other worlds will see that resistance is possible. The entire structure of our empire will collapse." "And would that be such a terrible thing?" a Queen asked softly. The silence that followed was deafening. The 3 advisors stared at their Queen as if she had spoken in an alien language. Finally, Zark found his voice. "Your Majesty, you cannot be serious. The Zephyrian Empire has brought order to chaos, peace to war, unity to division. Without our guidance, these lesser species will destroy themselves." "Or they might surprise us," the Queen replied. "They might find ways to solve their problems that we never imagined. They might create art and music and stories that could teach us new ways of seeing the universe." "This is madness," Vex whispered. "The human has poisoned your mind against your own people." The Queen's expression hardened. "My own people? Tell me, counselors, When was the last time any of you spoke to me as a friend rather than a subject? When did any of you share a joke with me, or ask about my feelings, or offer comfort when I was troubled? The advisors looked confused by the questions. Your Majesty, such things are not. That is, the relationship between ruler and subject does not ... Exactly, the Queen said firmly. You serve me out of fear and habit, not out of love or respect. And I have been so lonely for so long that I forgot there was any other way to live. Jake watched this exchange with growing amazement. The Queen was changing before his eyes, finding strength in vulnerability and wisdom in admitting ignorance. But he could also see the fear and anger building in her advisors. If you will not act to save the Empire, Zark said with cold finality, then we will act without you. The Queen's head snapped toward him. What did you say? The three of us combined have enough psychic power to crush this rebellion, Zark continued. We do not need your permission to save our civilization from destruction. You would defy me? The Queen asked, her voice deadly quiet. We would save you from your own weakness, Vex replied. The human has made you soft, but we will restore your strength once this crisis is over. Jake felt the air in the room begin to thicken with competing psychic energies. The Queen's power pressed against the combined will of her three advisors, and the crystal walls began to crack under the strain. You will not act without my command, the Queen said, her mental voice booming through their heads. We will not let the Empire fall because you have forgotten your duty. Zark shot back. The psychic battle was invisible, but Jake could feel its effects. His head pounded with pressure, and his vision blurred. The advisors were strong, but the Queen had ruled for 1,000 years, and her power was vast. The question was whether she would use it in that moment of crisis. Queen Velara looked at Jake. Her eyes held a question, a plea for guidance. Everything he had taught her about choice and trust and earning the right to lead came down to this moment. Jake met her gaze steadily and nodded once. He trusted her to make the right decision, even if he couldn't be sure what that decision would be. The Queen smiled, and Jake saw centuries of loneliness and doubt fall away from her features. When she spoke, her voice was calm and certain. Counselors, you have served the Empire faithfully for centuries, but your service ends now. I release you from all oaths and obligations. You are free to leave my palace and go wherever you choose. The three advisors stared at her in shock. Your Majesty, you cannot simply dismiss us. We are bound to serve the Empire until death. No, the Queen said gently. You are bound to serve me only as long as you choose to, and clearly you no longer choose to trust my judgment. So I give you the freedom to make your own path. Jake watched in amazement as the Queen did something no Zephyrian ruler had ever done before. She gave up her power voluntarily, trusting. 3 months had passed since the day Queen Velara dismissed her advisors and chose trust over control. The palace looked different now. The perfect crystal walls had been repaired, but they no longer glowed with the cold light of absolute authority. Instead, they pulsed gently with warmer colors that seemed to welcome visitors rather than intimidate them. Jake stood on a balcony overlooking the city and watched ships from dozens of different worlds landing in what had once been the Queen's private spaceport. Representatives from the former subject worlds were arriving for the first Council of Free Worlds, an idea that would have been unthinkable under the old Empire. You look thoughtful, said a familiar voice behind him. Jake turned to see Queen Velara approaching, though she no longer looked much like the terrifying ruler he had first met. She still wore robes of flowing light, but they were simpler now, more practical. Her hair was shorter, and her ancient eyes held warmth that hadn't been there before. Most importantly, she smiled when she saw him, a real smile full of genuine affection. I was thinking about how much has changed, Jake said, gesturing toward the landing ships. 6 months ago, you could have destroyed any of those worlds with a thought. Now their leaders are coming here as equals to help plan the future of the galaxy. Velara moved to stand beside him at the balcony railing. It is still strange to? Yesterday, a delegate from the mining world of Ketra actually disagreed with one of my proposals. My first instinct was to punish him for his insolence. But then I remembered what you taught me about listening to different viewpoints. What did you do? I asked him to explain his reasoning, she said with wonder in her voice. And do you? Know what? His idea was better than mine. We spent 3 hours discussing improvements to trade agreements, and I learned more in that time than I had in decades of simply commanding obedience. Jake smiled at the pride in her voice. How are my friends adjusting to everything? Velara's expression grew more serious. It has been difficult for them. Restoring their minds was ... complicated. Dr. Blake remembers everything that happened during the time when her thoughts were suppressed, but she experiences it like a half-remembered dream. She says it felt like being buried alive while still conscious. Jake winced. He had visited his friends regularly since Velara restored their free will, but the recovery was slow and painful. The violation of having their minds controlled had left deep scars that might never fully heal. Ryan still has nightmares, Velara continued, and Lisa cannot stand to be in enclosed spaces. They have every right to hate me for what I did to them, but they don't, Jake said gently. They're angry, yes, and hurt, but they understand that you are trying to learn a better way. Katie told me yesterday that watching you change has given her hope that anyone can choose to be different. Velara was quiet for a moment, watching the ships continue to arrive. Some of my own people have not been so forgiving. The advisors I dismissed have gathered followers and established a colony on the Outer Rim. They call themselves the True Zephyrian Empire and claim that I have betrayed everything our species stands for. Are you worried they'll try to restart the old ways? Perhaps. But I have learned something interesting about ruling through fear versus ruling through choice. The worlds that joined my new alliance did so voluntarily. They could leave at any time, but they choose to stay because they benefit from cooperation. The worlds that followed my former advisors were forced to submit. Already 3 of them have broken free and asked to join our alliance instead. Jake nodded, remembering the lessons from Earth's own history about the difference between empires built on conquest and unions built on mutual benefit. Speaking of the alliance, I got a message from Earth today. The Council wants me to return home to give a full report. Velara turned to face him, and Jake saw something flicker across her expression too quickly to identify. Of course, you have been away from your home for many months. Your people must be eager to hear about your experiences. They are, but there's something else. Jake took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to say would change everything. Between them, they've offered me a permanent position as Earth's ambassador to the new alliance. I would be stationed here, helping to coordinate human participation in the Council. Velara's eyes widened, and Jake saw hope bloom in her features before she carefully controlled her expression. That would be a great honor. Do you plan to accept? Jake looked out at the bustling spaceport, at the ships carrying beings who are learning to cooperate instead of conquer. He thought about the conversations he'd had with former slaves who are now free citizens, about the art and music and stories that were beginning to flourish in worlds that had been silent for centuries. He thought about Velara herself, the lonely ruler who had become someone capable of friendship and growth. I haven't decided yet, he said honestly. It would mean staying here permanently, never going back to Earth except for brief visits, building a life in a place that's completely different from anything I've ever known. But, Velara asked softly. Jake met her star-filled eyes and saw the question she didn't dare ask aloud. But I've also never been part of something as important as what we're building here. This alliance could change the entire galaxy. It could prove that different species can work together as equals instead of conquerors and subjects. The work would be challenging, Elara said carefully. There will be setbacks and conflicts. Some of the member worlds still don't trust each other completely. It could take decades to build the kind of lasting peace we envision. I know. But maybe that's exactly why Earth needs a permanent representative here. Someone who understands both human values and the complexity of galactic politics. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the Crystal City. The light caught in Velara's silver hair, and Jake found himself thinking about how beautiful she looked when she wasn't trying to be terrifying. There's something else I need to tell you, Velara said eventually. Something personal. Jake turned to give her his full attention. In all my centuries of existence, I have never had what your people would call a friend. I ruled through power and fear, surrounded by subjects who told me only what they thought I wanted to hear. But these past months, talking with you, learning from you, working beside you to build something new, I have discovered what friendship means. Jake felt warmth spread through his chest at her words. More than that, she continued, her voice growing softer. I have learned what it means to care about someone not because they serve me or fear me, but simply because of who they are. You challenged me when I was wrong, supported me when I doubted myself, and trusted me to make better choices even when I had given you no reason to believe I could change. Jake reached out and took her hand, marveling at how warm her crystal-like skin felt. You did change. You chose to give up absolute power because it was the right thing to do. You freed billions of beings because you learned to value their happiness over your own control. That took more courage than any battle I've ever fought. Velara's eyes shimmered with what might have been tears. If you decide to stay, if you accept this position as ambassador, would you consider staying not just as Earth's representative, but as my friend? As someone I can talk to honestly, who will tell me when I'm making mistakes, who will help me continue learning how to be better. Jake squeezed her hand gently. I can't think of anything I'd rather do. Even though it means giving up your old life? Even though you'll be the only human in a galaxy full of aliens? Jake looked around at the palace that had become his home, at the city where former enemies now worked together in peace, at the woman who had transformed from a terrifying conqueror into someone he cared about deeply. I'm not giving up anything. I'm choosing something better. Velara's smile was radiant, like starlight given form. Then you'll stay? I'll stay, Jake confirmed, but on one condition. Her smile faltered slightly. What condition? No more calling me Jake Morrison, like we're still in a formal diplomatic meeting. We're friends now. Just Jake is fine. Velara laughed, a sound like crystal bells ringing in harmony. Very well, Just Jake. But then you must call me Velara, not your majesty or queen. After all, in this new alliance, we are all equals. Jake grinned. Deal, Velara. They stood together on the balcony as the first stars appeared in the alien sky, watching ships from across the galaxy bring together beings who had once lived in fear and isolation. The future stretched out before them, uncertain, but full of possibilities that neither conquest nor submission could have created. Jake? Velara said quietly. Yes, thank you. For showing me what I could become. For believing I could change when I didn't believe it myself. Jake looked at this remarkable being who had given up an empire to learn how to be truly strong. Thank you for being brave enough to change, and for asking me to stay. Stay with. She had whispered on that first day, but it had been a command backed by overwhelming power. Tonight, under the stars of a free galaxy, it was simply a request from one friend to another, and Jake's answer was the easiest decision he had ever made.